The truth always reaches a breaking point in every major sports controversy. And this is that moment where everything finally comes crashing into the open. For weeks, the basketball establishment has been running a coordinated and incredibly frustrating campaign to convince everyone of something that simply didn't add up. They looked fans straight in the eye, they faced analysts with confidence, and they tried to sell the idea that keeping Caitlin Clark on the bench was some kind of brilliant, necessary, and highly advanced strategy. They leaned on talking points like veteran leadership, paying dues, and the so-called unwritten rules of Team USA basketball, but anyone with a basic understanding of the modern game could see right through it. It wasn't strategy, it wasn't genius, it was a mistake, a massive misjudgment of talent that has now reached its breaking point as the truth becomes impossible to ignore. After Team USA's dominant 101-46 blowout win over New Zealand, interim head coach Nate Tibbitz stepped up to the podium. He tried to dress it up with standard coach speak and carefully chosen words meant to protect the egos of established veterans. But if you really listen closely, what he said comes across as the closest thing to an admission you'll ever hear from a national team coach. Now it's time to break it all down, to strip away the safe language and political correctness, to dig into the box score, and to expose exactly how the coaching staff backed themselves into this situation. Because the reality is becoming undeniable that Caitlin Clark isn't just someone who deserves to start, she is the foundational piece this entire roster should be built around. So let's set the scene. Caitlin Clark finally gets the start, and you can almost feel the collective relief across the basketball world. But the opening minutes against New Zealand don't look perfect. The offense feels slightly out of sync, a bit hesitant, not quite the smooth machine people expected. And when Nate Tibbitz addressed the media after the game, he pointed directly at that slow start, opening the door to a much bigger conversation about what's really been going on behind the scenes.
I think, early game, back-to-back, quick turnaround. We weren't great in the first quarter, and I thought the last three quarters we really stepped up, competed. I thought our second group came in and really set the tone.
Listen carefully to the wording. He said they weren't great in the first quarter, and that the second unit came in and really set the tone. Right away, mainstream media voices and clickbait creators rushed to twist that quote into something it wasn't. They tried to frame it as criticism of Caitlin Clark, pushing the narrative that she failed in her first start, but that interpretation completely falls apart if you actually understand the X's and O's of basketball. What Tibbitz was really doing, even if unintentionally, was exposing a flaw in his own lineup decisions. He wasn't throwing Caitlin Clark under the bus. He was highlighting a deeper issue with how the team was constructed on the floor. When you finally decide to start one of the most explosive, high-paced, tempo-driving point guards the game has ever seen, you don't pair her with another ball-dominant guard who thrives in a slower, methodical system. Yet that is exactly what Team USA did by putting Caitlin Clark alongside Chelsea Gray. Gray is an all-time great and an incredible talent, but her style is built around control, patience, and half-court execution, while Caitlin Clark operates at full speed, pushing transitions, stretching defenses from deep, and constantly applying pressure. When those two styles share the floor, it creates a built-in contradiction that limits the effectiveness of both players. It's like putting a Ferrari behind a tractor on a one-lane road. Clark is ready to push the pace the instant the ball comes off the rim, but the team hierarchy forces her to hold back and defer to the veteran presence. That hesitation disrupts spacing, slows momentum, and allows the opposing defense to settle in comfortably instead of scrambling to keep up. New Zealand, a team that should have been overwhelmed by speed and tempo, was instead able to set up in the half-court because Team USA essentially chose to slow itself down. So when Tibbitz says the starting group didn't set the tone, he's not wrong. But the issue isn't a lack of talent or effort. The real problem is a miscalculation in chemistry and fit. The coaching staff tried to satisfy two opposing priorities at once, keeping veterans comfortable while also responding to public pressure to start Clark. And in doing so, they created a lineup that worked against itself instead of maximizing its greatest strength.
And that's what you want, right? You want that consistency from group to group. The first group didn't have it, they didn't set the tone, but the second group came out and did it.
He repeated it again, saying the first group didn't have it. They didn't set the tone, but the second unit came in and did a really good job. That line got echoed and amplified, but now it's time to actually break down what that second group really did and why it looked so effective. The bench unit featured players like Ryan Howard and Angel Reese, and yes, they were outstanding. Howard poured in 18 points while shooting efficiently from deep, and Reese immediately made her presence felt on the boards, controlling the glass with energy and aggression. They looked dominant, they looked confident, and on the surface, it felt like they completely flipped the game. But here's the part that gets overlooked. They didn't suddenly unlock some brand new offensive system or discover a secret formula. The reason they looked so sharp is because of the work that had already been done before they even stepped onto the floor. The starting unit, despite its awkward spacing and lack of rhythm, had already spent several minutes wearing down the New Zealand defense. And even within a slower, more controlled system, Caitlin Clark's presence alone changes everything. She draws constant attention, pulling multiple defenders toward her on nearly every possession, forcing opponents to fight through screens, rotate faster, and stay mentally locked in at all times. That kind of pressure builds up quickly. It drains energy, it forces mistakes, and it weakens defensive structure. So by the time the second unit checked in, they weren't facing a fresh, organized defense. They were going up against a group that had already been stretched, tested, and pushed to its limits. Naturally, the bench players were able to take advantage of that situation, and to their credit, they executed at a high level and made the most of it. This is one of the fundamental truths of basketball that doesn't always show up in the box score. Momentum, fatigue, and defensive wear don't get properly credited, but they shape everything that happens next. The coaching staff understands this, which makes what came next even more revealing, because the most telling moment of that entire press conference, the one that truly exposed the confusion behind the scenes, came when Tibbitz was directly asked about why the offense looked so out of sync to begin with.
Tournament and just talking to Kara and our coaching staff is it's not always easy for players to get into a rhythm when the coaches are messing with the lineups, and part of that is
it's not always easy for players to find their rhythm when the coaching staff keeps adjusting the lineups, and part of that process is figuring out who actually fits well together and who doesn't. And just like that, the truth slips out directly from the interim head coach himself, messing with the lineups. That right there is the mistake, the clearest admission of what's really going wrong behind the scenes. Think about the timing. The team is only months away from the WNBA season and preparing for major international competition. Yet, the coaching staff is openly admitting they're treating Team USA like a live experiment. They're still testing combinations, still shuffling pieces, still searching for answers they should already have. But when you have a generational talent like Caitlin Clark on your roster, you don't keep experimenting to see what works. You don't treat her like just another variable in the equation. You build around her, completely and unapologetically, and you find the 4 players who perfectly match her pace, spacing, and court vision. The real issue was never about whether Caitlin Clark was ready to start. That was never the question. The real issue is that the coaching staff seems hesitant to fully hand her control of the system. There's a clear fear of disrupting the established veteran hierarchy. So instead of committing, they keep rotating, adjusting, and managing minutes like a political balancing act. In doing so, they sacrifice offensive flow just to maintain locker room harmony. But no matter how much they shuffle the lineups or force her into awkward systems, Caitlin Clark's impact keeps breaking through. And the box score from this game becomes the strongest evidence against the current approach. In a game where the coach himself admitted the starters struggled to find rhythm, Clark still played 23 minutes and was a driving force in a massive blowout win. She put up 14 points, added 6 assists, and did it with incredible efficiency, showing clear growth in how she attacks international defenses. She was flawless inside the arc, going a perfect 4 for 4. When defenders tried to push her off the three-point line, she didn't force bad shots or panic under pressure. Instead, she adjusted smoothly, attacking the paint, using her footwork, and knocking down mid-range shots and floaters with confidence. This is the evolution of her game in real time, turning into a true 3-level scorer who can hurt defenses in multiple ways. And if you want the clearest measure of her influence, you don't even need to watch every play. You can look at the numbers. She finished with a plus 24 rating, meaning Team USA outscored New Zealand by 24 points while she was on the floor. That level of impact speaks louder than any narrative. It shows she was one of the most effective players in the game, even while being surrounded by constantly changing and sometimes incompatible lineups. The film backs it up, the numbers confirm it, and that overwhelming production leads to the most frustrating part of this entire situation. Because the lack of respect doesn't just show up on the court, it carries over into the way this story is being discussed and framed off the court as well.
Dominant performance. I feel like, how come Caitlin Clark not at the podium yet? Like, she should have got player of the game or something. Even the first game that she went off in, she didn't get invited.
The frustration boiling over from the commentator isn't random. It's completely justified. And it points to something much bigger happening behind the scenes. He's asking the question everyone is thinking, why isn't Caitlin Clark at the podium yet? especially after a performance that clearly deserved player of the game recognition. Instead, there's confusion, there's hesitation, and there's a sense that something just doesn't add up. What he's really calling out is a pattern, not a one-time decision, but a consistent trend that keeps showing up. When Caitlin Clark comes off the bench and delivers a dominant double-double, she's nowhere to be seen in the post-game spotlight. When she finally gets the start, puts up 14 points, shoots perfectly inside the arc, and helps lead the team to a massive blowout win, she still isn't the one addressing the media. Instead, she's kept in the background while others step forward. That's not accidental, that's intentional, and it reflects a clear effort to shape the narrative in a very specific way. The message being pushed is obvious. They want to emphasize that the team is bigger than any one player. They want to highlight depth, experience, and the contributions of the veterans and the bench unit. And while that idea sounds good on paper, the execution of it comes across as forced and, at times, even counterproductive. Because no matter how much they try to spread the spotlight, the reality on the court keeps pulling it right back to Caitlin Clark. You can't downplay that kind of impact. You can't hide it or redirect it, no matter how carefully the narrative is managed. Her influence shows up the moment she crosses half court, when defenses immediately shift, when multiple defenders react to her presence, and when the entire pace of the game changes because of what she brings. Her value isn't defined by a post-game interview or a media award. It's reflected in sold-out arenas, rising viewership, and the visible pressure she puts on every opponent she faces. The coaching staff can continue adjusting lineups, experimenting with combinations, and trying to balance internal dynamics, but the underlying truth has already surfaced. The system works best when the ball is in Caitlin Clark's hands, and she's allowed to control the tempo on her terms. That's when the team looks fluid, dangerous, and nearly impossible to stop. And now, everything builds toward the next real test against Spain. This isn't a team that will allow slow starts or disorganized stretches. Spain is disciplined, structured, and tactically sharp, the kind of opponent that will punish every mistake and expose every weakness. If the coaching staff continues to experiment instead of committing to a clear identity built around Clark's strengths, they're going to find themselves in a much tougher battle than expected. At this point, the margin for error is gone. The time for cautious decisions and balancing egos is running out. The fans already see what's happening, and the numbers back it up. The only question left is whether the coaching staff is ready to fully embrace it and build a system that maximizes their most impactful player, or if they'll continue holding back and risk falling short when it matters most.